This is Josh Findlay with the Election Protection Podcast, where we talk all things election integrity. We're joined today by Fred Lucas, author with the Daily Signal and author of the book, The Myth of Voter Suppression. Fred, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Now, one thing that we do on this podcast is I don't do the introductions of our guests. I let you tell the audience about yourself. So Fred, tell us a little bit about your work, how you ended up at the Daily Signal, and then why you got involved in election integrity.
So I've been working with the Daily Signal since 2016, and I've covered the White House. Both the came in there actually covering the the Obama administration for a little while, the Trump administration, and the Biden administration. And I cover primarily have covered a lot of election integrity issues. I wrote a book about it, actually, the Myth of Voter Suppression, and it gets into a lot of what the left has made claims about. Every voter ID law and so forth is somehow voter suppression. Knock down those myths and point out that there are real voter fraud concerns out there, and the numbers back that up, as opposed to some of these claims of suppression, which you cannot find actual evidence of.
So let's talk about that. Let's dive into your book for a little bit.
Yeah.
First of all, why do you call it the myth of voter suppression? Why is this phrase voter suppression a myth?
Well, and let's clarify, in modern times, it's
right.
In current day, it's a myth. Certainly the country's had some horrible voter suppression in the past, but we've heard largely from Stacey Abrams after she lost an election, from President Biden when they were trying to ram through some legislation. They talked about Jim Crow 2.0 in certain states. When Georgia wanted to expand voter ID laws and so forth, Texas and other states wanted to expand some election integrity laws. Every one of those proposals was always called Jim Crow 2.0, which is really a bizarre thing. And Jim Crow was a horrible time period, and
right.
to compare voter ID to that is sort of really mind-boggling. And I think it was such an oversell, which is why I don't think they got very far with it. But the fact is, though, as the book notes and gives evidence of this, every study has shown that voter ID laws have not only not depressed turnout, in most cases there's been an increase in voter turnout when these laws have been passed at the state level. The same is true with cleaning up the voter list, and that's getting the names of dead people off the voter lists, which would seem like a common sense thing to do. But when governors or legislatures have tried to do that, it's always been met with objections from the left. And this is not just I bring up Democratic politicians, the president, Stacey Abrams, and so forth, but we've seen this what I call the voter suppression hysteria industrial complex, being groups like the Brennan Center for Justice, which is a liberal think tank and advocacy group, which has been putting out sort of propaganda for a long time that everything is voter suppression, that there should be practically, no restrictions. And also, I mean, Stacey Abrams, she has this Fair Fight Action organization. Even the League of Women Voters, which used to be a fairly moderate group, has really become a hardcore ideological group. And just down the line, we've seen this. There's actually a chapter about the big money behind this group, all these groups, and a lot of it ties back to Arabella advisors, some even in the Soros money and so forth. So.
Yeah, we've had a lot of guests talk about the way that the left is spending money on what we call election integrity issues. I call it weaponization of the election process issues. So you talked about a lot of things right there. So let's unpack some of this a little bit. And I want to go back to this voter suppression, right? The myth of voter suppression, because you're right. Our country has had a history of some terrible voter suppression in the past, right? But the left is using that now as a term to combat every effort to increase transparency and security in the election process. Why do you think they're doing that? Why is this an effective phrase for them to use?
Well, I mean, it is a phrase that has a certain level of emotion to it. I mean, but just because there's and I have actually mentioned this in the book, that just as you don't want to compare petty things or disagreements to the Holocaust or slavery, um, Jim Crow is kind of just short of those awful things. I mean, there were just some horrible things for that 100-year period of Jim Crow, and I mean, I think it's almost unconscionable to uh, bring that type of thing up uh, when you're just arguing against a voter ID law, or in this case of Democrats in Congress, they were trying to get the what they call the For the People Act through, which would have basically banned state voter ID laws across the country, and it would have put essentially not allowed a lot of these election integrity measures, such as cleaning the voter list. It would have that law would have, had it passed, would have encouraged ballot harvesting.
I think that's exactly right. A lot of these measures that are being proposed are just, you said it was an unconscionable comparison, right. And I think there's a lot of accuracy to that. So if we're going to talk about this, in my mind, the 2018 election in Georgia with Stacey Abrams kind of starts this most recent conversation about election integrity, right? In my mind, and in full disclosure, I was working in Georgia on that race, actually, in 2018. But that started this conversation about election integrity that led into the 2020 election. Tell us about the 2018 election in Georgia and how Stacey Abrams got her start in election issues, really, in that race.
Yeah, and she was the ultimate election denier.
That's right.
Yes, Stacey Abrams was. I mentioned in the book that you had various organizations on the left out there, again, like the Brennan Center, I think maybe the main one that pushed the Smith, but they were trying to push it in sort of position papers and so forth. Stacey Abrams was this very charismatic figure that became sort of the high priestess of the Smith. And
so it's pretty incredible. Stacey Abrams built a career off of election denialism, right? Yes, she was really the first kind of election denier of this most recent conversation. She was the original election denier about this most recent conversation about election integrity. What were some of the things that she talked about specifically in her race that just turned out to not be true?
Yeah, she pushed this view that, she came very close in 2018 in that race against Brian Kemp, but she lost, and nothing wrong with that. But she did not concede the race. She went around giving speech after speech saying, "I really won the race." It became largely a litmus test for Democrats running in the 2020 election cycle, in the presidential primary. Like Liz Warren, Kamala Harris were all out there saying that Stacey Abrams is the rightful governor of Georgia. Hillary Clinton started speaking about it, and Hillary Clinton said that sort of in the same context of claiming that she was the rightful president as well. So it became this very trendy thing for Stacey Abrams, the original election denier. And so from there, she did run again in 2022. She lost pretty substantially in that race. So we don't hear as much about it from her anymore. But Democrats are still pushing this line about voter suppression.
They are. That's exactly right. Another thing that I want to talk about from your book, and I want to make sure I get this phrase right, but you talk about the suppression hysteria industrial complex. Tell us about that. What does that mean?
Okay. Yeah. I mainly view that as a group of organizations that are pushing this, largely funded by a lot of dark money groups like Arabella Advisors, but also Stacey Abrams 1630 Fund. I'm sorry, I'm conflating two groups. Fair Fight Action, and the Brennan Center for Justice, who has been pushing this line for quite a while. These groups, every time a voter ID measure is proposed out there, these groups are first out there to say, no, this is voter suppression. You can't do anything along these lines. And there's a lot of money behind that. There's a chapter in the book that tells you where the money's coming from Arabella advisors, from Soros and other avenues.
So we've had a couple of podcasts talking about the financing of the left when it comes to election issues, but give us a brief summary of that. What do you write about in your book on that topic?
Oh yeah, it's the chapter it gets into Arabella is funding, and also Arabella is also funding in part this sort of extension of what was called Zuckerbucks from the 2020 election. This group of election organizations that say it's a U.S. Alliance for Election Excellence. You have a lot of Arabella money in that group of various organizations that are pushing what they say are best practices at the local level. And there's a lot of reason to be suspicious of that. And you've got also Tides Foundation, some other just sort of general big funders out there that have been part of this for a while. And to say that, they just want good government and, honest elections. No, that's not what they're into. These are the money behind this has been the dark money that's been funding every left-wing cause for a long time.
It's interesting. We've seen this money on the left spark political activities through nonprofit organizations and things like that. It's something that our side has not caught up to until recently, right? And I'm not even sure that we're caught up now.
Right. Yeah.
What is the state of the right when it comes to matching this money mechanism that the left has?
Well, I think the right has come back in terms of not completely, not equally, I don't think yet, but the right has been fighting for election integrity for a while, and we have seen that. After the 2020 election. Several states, I think about 20 something states have passed election integrity measures, even a couple with Democratic governors. Kansas and Kentucky passed some election integrity measures. Pennsylvania, for that matter, they didn't expand voter ID, but they did ban Zuckerbucks under a Democratic governor. So that Governor Wolf was still in office at the time. So we've seen, I think there's been a lot of progress on making elections more trustworthy going into 2024. What we do have to worry about is at the federal level, and I have a chapter in the book about this, is the Biden's administrative state election takeover. And that was this Executive Order 14019. And in that he directs every federal agency to be involved in increasing voter participation, as if the federal government has a role in that. And secondly, he directs these federal agencies to work with non-governmental organizations, and they say don't worry, these are nonpartisan. Now, the administration has not been forthcoming about this. We've found the Daily Signal has found out through FOIAs, also the Heritage Oversight Project has found out through FOIAs that the groups that they're working with have been organizations like Demos, a left-wing think tank that essentially wrote the executive order. They've worked with the ACLU. They've worked with pretty much the SPLC, Southern Poverty Law Center. It's pretty much the who's who of left-wing organizations. They had a large gathering with White House officials about how you're going to help us implement this executive order. So there's nothing nonpartisan about this, and the Biden administration is trying to put the thumb on the scale of the federal government behind elections, and it's not nonpartisan.
So I can tell you that the Texas Public Policy Foundation, an organization that I work with, was not invited to that meeting at the White House, right? What conservative groups were invited to talk about this executive order?
I'm pretty certain that there were none, and it could be that the White House would probably come back and say, well, we were looking for good government groups. I'm sure, but yeah, this was clearly this it's clear what the effort is here. At most, there were nonpartisan groups such as disability advocacy groups and so forth that aren't particularly partisan. But I mean, it was overwhelmingly partisan groups, and I think that was where putting a few organizations in there that don't scream partisanship might have given them a little bit of plausible deniability, but not much.
Yeah, just to be clear, all of our C3s are supposed to be nonpartisan, right? They are supposed to be, but we know that is not the case, especially when it comes to the left. So you've been on a lot of reporting on this recently about how this executive order is being implemented. Mm-hmm. And you said that the administration has not been forthcoming about this. I mean, I think there have even been some courts that have said that these plans that agencies were required to put together protected by executive privilege. But in your reporting recently, what have you found? How is this executive order being implemented?
Yeah, part of it is that they've tried to put up notices in federal agencies about voting, registering to vote, and like at public housing units that they've registered to vote, which doesn't sound necessarily a bad thing, but there is also always that sort of concern when particularly if you're partnering with a left-wing organization that's registered signing up voters on behalf of another federal agency, sort of like you're implying those are nice government benefits you have there. It'd be a shame if something happened to them. And you better go out there and vote and maybe vote the way we want you to vote.
Well, and I think that's the concern, right? Is it's not just the government agencies, it's that they're partnering with these left-wing organizations to implement this plan.
Yeah. And these are, I mean, sometimes these are vulnerable populations who don't know that their vote's not being tracked. And they may be intimidated to vote a certain way.
So it's interesting, one thing that Zuck Bucks really got hammered for in Wisconsin was, there was a court that overturned the mobile voting vans that would pick up vans because it said that it had a partisan effect, right, in the way that it was used. And what you found out about this executive order, is there anything that we should be worried about having a partisan effect, even if maybe on its face it looks like it is, neutral? It's something that everyone should be in favor of, but has a clearly partisan effect.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I mean, just the fact of what areas that it will most likely target. The Oversight Project, actually, with Heritage, put out some information today about how this is being targeted in Arizona, major battleground state. If we're going to see this, some people call this executive order Biden bucks because kind of a spinoff of Zucker bucks. It's not really Biden's bucks though. It's the taxpayers' bucks.
That's right, and that's a key distinction.
Yeah, and that's what's really harmful and concerning about this whole thing. That you have the taxpayer money being used in a get out the vote effort for Democrats, and that's going to cast shade over this election, unfortunately, because I don't think we need any more elections with controversy around it.
That's exactly right. I think that is what we need to avoid at all costs. So that's a perfect analysis. And another thing that you've written about is foreign funding for ballot measures in certain states. And this is an interesting topic because the left always talks about foreign interference in election. Right. I mean, they investigated Donald Trump about this. It's just been a big issue. What have you found about foreign funding in elections recently?
Well, a really important one is that, reported on this in the Daily Signal, about we got two fronts here. Congress is looking into this, and it has some bipartisan backing. It passed a measure passed the House Administration Committee, which is the committee that oversees elections. And in Ohio passed a sweeping ballot measure there, or to block foreign funding of ballot measures. The legislature passed it. The governor signed it. It did not have entirely, it wasn't necessarily bipartisan there. And a big reason for that is because we saw some foreign funding was dumped into the abortion measure. And Democrats very much like that measure. It enshrined abortion, no restrictions into the Ohio Constitution. And that was largely funded by the 1630 Fund, which is part of Arabella Advisors. They got a lot of their money from a Swiss billionaire, Han Wiz, and from there, they've also funded a lot of dumped something like $100 million into ballot initiatives into 25 other states. So, and they get a lot of foreign funding, the 1630 Fund. So, Ohio, what makes them different from other states is that they passed a measure restricting direct and indirect money to fund state ballot initiatives. And so that's going to get into these dark money groups like Arabella Advisors. And you do have a few other states that have had restrict corporations or foreign governments from funding campaigns, but this was Ohio goes to the individuals and indirect as well as direct.
So just to be clear, what was happening here is foreign actors, you know, this 1630 Fund,
Right.
which is run by a foreign actor, was funding ballot initiatives, right? Or opposition to ballot initiatives. Essentially, you had a foreign actor interfering in a ballot initiative process.
The 1630 Fund was being funded through this Swiss billionaire, right?
And so Ohio passed a law prohibiting this, right? Which makes sense because we already prohibit foreign interference on our elections.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It was a huge law because there was already, this is already restricted from giving to candidates. And this expands that to ballot initiatives. And this is not the case though in federal elections just yet. I mean, the federal government is looking at banning foreign dollars from going into state ballot initiatives, just as a federal ban, and the jurisdiction would be that it's a national security issue. You don't want this type of thing happening. You don't want China or Russia certainly to be involved in this kind of thing.
I was going to say, I mean, it seems like it makes a lot of sense, right? We already limit foreign access to our elections in other ways, foreign contributions to our candidates. We should probably do the same thing for ballot initiatives as well. So this seems like a very common sense law. What do we expect the left is going to say about this?
Yeah, well, at the congressional level, there hasn't been a lot of vocal opposition just yet. Now, one would think, I mean, that they wouldn't necessarily oppose it. I would anticipate that it could come up with some sort of, maybe the opposition might be claiming that it's too much nationalism or something. I'm not even sure what excuse they would have for this. Importantly, though, the FEC thought it was a problem, but they determined that they couldn't make a ruling on it. There was a Montana ballot initiative, and an Australian company threw a lot of money behind that ballot initiative. There was a complaint made to the Federal Election Commission saying this violates the law. You're not supposed to contribute to candidates. The FEC came back and said, well, this is not a federal matter. And these aren't candidates. This is a ballot initiative. So sorry, we can't rule on that. But they did make a report and a recommendation to Congress saying this might be something that you would want to look at and you would want to pass, which is in some sense we want Congress being more involved than agencies anyway. So
right. No, I think that makes sense. So shifting gears one more time, let's start talking about 2024.
Yeah.
You have a very holistic view of the election integrity system going into this election because of your writing, everything else. I'm curious, what do you anticipate from an election integrity perspective for election season 2024?
Well, I think it will be a mixed bag, I guess. One, I think we should not have the same questions surrounding it that we had in 2020, because I mean, there's going to be a lot of the mail-in voting that we will have. That will be a little more regulated. We're going to see a lot more voter ID laws in place. Almost half the states passed election integrity laws to improve things. So on the flip side, though, we do have this Biden's executive order. We do have the we don't know yet the full extent to how the federal government wants to put their thumb on the scale in an election. And, the Justice Department has blocked access. They invoked executive privilege to prevent the public from seeing their strategic plan. That was part of Biden's order. He directed every single department to produce a strategic plan of how you're going to implement this executive order to get out the vote. So we don't know. I mean, some of the smaller agencies like the Railroad Retirement Board, which is not something that people think a lot about. They released their made public their strategic plan, and a few others have. But the really large agencies, DHS, DOJ, and others are not right now. So that's being litigated actually by a government watchdog group. The Foundation for Government Accountability has been suing to get the DOJ plan. So we'll see where that goes.
So people are investigating to figure out what these plans are. Is anybody fighting back against this executive order? I mean, we were talking the other week. I think there have been only one, maybe two lawsuits filed challenging this. What are people doing to fight back against this executive order?
Well, the House Administration Committee, again, has actually subpoenaed 15 cabinet members of Biden to come in and explain, either for interviews or depositions, or actually just before hearings, what you're doing with this, how you're implementing this executive order. Is it being done in a fair, nonpartisan way? I mean, here's the thing: if this was and on paper, when the Biden administration put this out in March 2021, it was presented as a benevolent, we're saving democracy type thing. If that was the case, they should be shouting from the hills about every little detail of this. And
that's right.
I mean, anytime something is not operating in the sunshine, just as a general matter, that's when people start getting suspicious. So that's the big problem. I think this executive order, what's being done, we might find out it's on the up and up entirely. But if that's the case, I wish the Biden administration would just be more forthcoming about it.
I think that's a great point to end on. Fred, this has been incredibly helpful. Tell us, where can people find more of your writing and find out about your book?
Just go to dailysignal.com. There's a lot of great news there. And please check out the book, The Myth of Voter Suppression. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or wherever you want to buy books. So,
thanks for joining us, Fred.
Yeah, thank you.
This is Josh Findlay with the Election Protection Podcast. We were joined today by Fred Lucas, author of The Myth of Voter Suppression. I encourage you to go check that book out. And thanks for joining us.